Welcome to Be the Revolution podcast, presented by GM Revolution, a men's skincare line dedicated to helping them change the world. Hi friends, it's me, your host Michael. On the last episode, we talked with entrepreneur Matt Sheldon on how hard work and learning from failure can lead to a successful work life. At GM Revolution, we know that mental health and self-awareness are just as important as success at work. Today we are featuring a different kind of hero. On today's episode, I'm joined with my good friend, Brendan McGuire. In our discussion, we talk about how his personal experience with becoming a yoga instructor has influenced the person he is today. Brendan shares his story along with 3 tips you can start doing today as a way to take the yoga experience outside of the studio and into your day-to-day life. And welcome back to Be the Revolution podcast presented by GM Revolution, a skincare line for men. I'm here joined today with a good friend of mine, Brendan McGuire. Yes, we share the same last name. We go back a long time. And today he's here to join us and talk about his experience with how he got into yoga at a very young age and how that's kind of shaped some of his lifestyle choices and the way he goes about living. So without further ado, here is Brendan.
Hi, everyone. Like he said, I'm Brendan McGuire. I got into yoga at the ripe age of 14. I did it when I was getting into high school, and I was trying to really up my lacrosse game because I was a travel lacrosse player at the time. And when I was told that to make my game better, to improve as an athlete, the number one suggestion that I always heard was to start doing yoga. And that really was the birth of my love for yoga throughout the time. I got, like I said, interested in it at the age of 14. And a year later, I made the commitment to get certified at around 15. I got certified at the age of 16 and have been teaching since. And now, as I'm approaching my 5th year of teaching, it's really been a dream come true is all I can say. I love every minute of it. I love doing it. It's my job away from my job kind of deal.
So you got into yoga because of lacrosse and you were told that this could, bring your game to the next level. So why back then at 14 years old what was the decision to, not only do yoga but to start becoming certified and teaching it yourself? Because it seems like you took that recommendation and just ran with it.
Yeah. So when I first got into it, it was almost my quirky thing. It was the thing like, hey, I'm doing something that's kind of new and different. It was my here's my fun fact. I do yoga, and as I continued to practice yoga, my mom said to me one day, "Hey, you should look at getting certified." Since at the time I was 16, she was like, "This could be your job. You could start teaching from this." And she saw how much I loved it and my dedication, and she really pushed me herself to start teaching. And that was really how I started running with it. I got the support from my family early on, and I went to a studio nearby me, and I asked if even though I'm only 16, most yoga studios actually mandate that you're 18 before you can take a teacher training, process. But I asked the studio, since I was really close to them after practicing with them for a while, if they would be okay with, me joining the teacher training program. And they were completely okay with it, which I wasn't surprised, but I was grateful. 100% I was grateful. And yeah, and that was kind of just the start of it. So I got certified over the course of 8 weeks. It was 200 hours within 8 weeks, which was, a very intense training that, I mean, really shaped my life. I mean, it was, if I could, count to one moment in my high school career, in my whole entire life, really, that that completely changed me as a person. I would say that my teacher training for yoga was definitely that.
You're in high school at the time and you're a full-time student, you're on the lacrosse team, and you're trying to get certified as a yoga instructor. How was that balance? Did yoga help in any way? Because it seems like you had a lot going on at one time.
Yeah, so I got certified in the fall, which means that for me at the time in high school, it was cross country season. So the way that it worked, at least schedule wise, you wake up, you go to school, and then right afterwards was cross country practice, and that was really the push for me to actually start running because the faster I ran, the quicker I would get done with practice. because my teacher training was 4 o'clock to 10 o'clock on weekdays, and on the weekends it was 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. So it was, I mean, I think it was 5 days or 6 days like that a week. I think we had Wednesdays off. But really, it pushed me to actually start running faster so I could get done and, get some of my homework done so I didn't have to do it on the tail end of my teacher training because my teacher training was
That's some
ending at
great
10.
motivation there.
Yeah. So I would love to say that I balanced it out perfectly and stuff like that, but I mean when you're slamming your day fully, 14 hours, 16 hours a day, you're getting up at 6 a.m. and you're going to bed at, 10, 11, even 12 some days. You're busy from sun up to sundown. I didn't have that much time, free time at all. But the thing is my free time, quote unquote, those hours from 4 to 10, I was pushing myself to, learn more about the human body. I was teaching yoga and practicing yoga and learning how to teach, which were all things that I think are really good for mental health. So I really didn't have, any periods where I was over concerned about, making sure that I could like take time to check in with myself because I was checking in with myself every single day that I was at teacher training. So it wasn't
Yeah.
definitely the easiest schedule to have, but since I was doing something not only that I loved, but I was also doing something that was good for me mentally, physically, spiritually, it was well worth it.
Seems like you found a very niche way to pursue and learn something new. Like you said, you kind of stand out. That's your fun fact. But at the same time, you found a way to stay busy while maintaining good mental health. And on top of it, you're making money off of that.
Exactly. Exactly.
That sounds like kind of the perfect combination of what you could spend your time doing. Yep.
For college, working a busy schedule. I still teach 5 days a week, for my college, and things might change now given the pandemic. But teaching 5 days a week, it didn't feel like a job. It was something that I could go and interact with the community and see these students who I see 5 6 days a week essentially because of teaching and just seeing them around campus. And forming that community, forming that bond with every individual. It's something that even though I'm busy, quote unquote, teaching, I don't feel busy.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. So, kind of scaling it back to when you were first starting, you said before that, you did stand out for doing yoga, especially as a 14-year-old in high school playing lacrosse, a very physical sport. Not a lot of not a lot of lacrosse players, especially in high school, are out there doing yoga in their free time. What was that like in terms of being on a team sport, but doing stuff that other people really weren't doing, but also trying to fit in high school? How was that?
I personally never experienced any, let's call it like negative side effects. I didn't. I mean, sure, my friends would tease me for it or something like that, but it was never something that people really had a problem with. I'll say, and that's something that I always will tell other people. If you have something that you want to do and it's not really considered normal or it's not really considered, the thing to do, you really shouldn't care about that because if you have a passion for it, most people will be able to recognize that you have the passion for it. And I have the belief personally that most people aren't, mean to the core. And if they see that you have a passion for something, even in high school where kids can quote unquote be ruthless or terrible to people who are outside of the norm, I never got anything bad from it. Being in a team sport, all my teammates would ask me, hey, my hamstring hurts, what kind of stretches can I do for this? And that was a way that I could use my knowledge for the betterment of my team. Even just in interactions with my friends who know I'm a yoga instructor, they would say, "Hey, Brendan, my back hurts. What can I do for it?" And it's like those simple interactions that you have, and it doesn't even need to be a skill that you're useful to other people, but like I said, that's why I tell everyone, if you have something that you want to do that's, more out of the norm. I had a really pleasant experience with, doing something that was very out of the norm for a 14-year-old boy to do.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think it's great that, you're challenging yourself, but at the same time, you're bringing it to another community and sharing what you learn with the people you interact with every day.
Exactly.
Forward, for those that are listening who have no experience with yoga, what would you say to them? And if they're interested in getting into it, how would you suggest they go about that? Or on the other side, for people that aren't interested in getting into it, what are some of the things that you would tell them?
So I'll answer your first question first. If you have an interest but are either worried or scared or even just any of those feelings towards yoga or physical fitness as a whole, always go in with an open mentality to any class that you're going to. I can't speak on the behalf of every yoga instructor in the country, in the world, but I truly have not met a yoga instructor that if you're doing the pose the wrong way, they're gonna, point you out in the middle of class and say, "Hey, this person's doing it wrong." They're always looking to grow. They're always looking to give people, their best self. And that's something that I teach all my classes towards, because yoga truly, and this is going to be really cheesy, but yoga is truly for everybody and everybody. No matter where you stand in your life, there is yoga for you. There is a different style of yoga that you can work with, that you will love. There's so much from hot yoga, which is super disciplined and intense, to, a more restorative practice like hatha yoga or yin yoga. And those two formats drastically, starkly contrast to, hot yoga or like a power vinyasa, where, and these are big words, but, these styles are very different. And because the styles are very different, it's a catch-all. Yoga's a catch-all for everyone. No matter who you are, you can find it. And if you don't have that interest, going on to, what you were saying at the tail end, what could I say to people who don't have that interest or don't have that need? It's always just give it a shot. There might not be a yoga instructor or a style that you like. And if that turned you off to the idea of yoga, or if that, pushed you away from physical fitness as a whole, it's something that maybe could be looked into again, to give yourself a second chance, to give the practice a second chance. Because even if you're against it, physical fitness is something that not only increases your physical well-being, but also your mental well-being. I have never felt as good as when I'm practicing yoga. And I can say that those 8 weeks in my teacher training, although they were stressful and busy, they were probably, the solid 8 weeks in a row that I can say were like, the best of my life, the most changing of my life. Just because, although it's busy and stressful, I'm doing something that was good for me. And I was doing something that was good for my mental, physical, and spiritual well-being. And I think that I don't think that my testament should be enough, but I think that my testament could offer an insight into, whether you had a bad experience the first time or didn't like this style. Maybe it's something that you should just try again and try a different format.
I think it's funny that you mentioned how disciplined and maybe rigorous a practice like hot yoga would be, because as if I recall correctly, when you were going through all of your training, you specifically brought me, who had never done yoga at the time, to a hot yoga class. And let me
That
tell you,
is true.
I to this day I have never been back to hot yoga. I've gone to yoga classes and I follow along a lot online to videos, but never again have I done that.
And that's important. Hot yoga might not just be your style. I remember when we were in there, we were probably 15 minutes in, and I think you looked at me and you mouthed like, "Is it going to get colder in here, or are we done yet?" or something like that. And I was like, "Oh man, like we are 15 minutes in. We got 60 minutes left. Let's go." And
Yeah, and
it was
no,
a
I,
very
I
interesting class. It was fun.
I think what happened actually was you just said, "Do you want to come to yoga with me?" I don't think I knew going into it that it was hot yoga,
Yeah, and then
but
you
it
walk into the room and it's 40% humidity, 105 degrees, and you're like, "Where am I right now?"
yes, I think it was also winter time, if I recall correctly, and
It
I walked
was.
out of the studio. It's winter time in Chicago, and I walked out of the studio with my shirt off and drove the whole way home without a shirt on and maybe the windows down in maybe January in Chicago.
Yeah, we're talking like 20-degree weather at this point, before wind and or rain. I don't think it was snowing that night. But yeah, I mean that's what it'll do to you. I mean, you really cleanse your whole body. You really sweat everything out. It's funny, I used to teach hot yoga classes on Saturday mornings and Sunday mornings at the studio that I got certified through. And I could always tell who went drinking the night before, because you walk around their mat and truly, and don't let this, scare you about, what your instructors think about you. But truly, I mean, some people smell like alcohol, and, hot yoga will do that where like you will literally sweat out just everything, throughout the class.
That is definitely true. In that particular class, I remember having to step over a couple puddles on my way out. Um,
Oh yeah, puddles are a very big norm. I mean, there are a couple people who I know who have taken classes with who are sweaters, and they will form Lake Michigan around their mat if they could.
but that was my personal experience of how you introduced me to yoga. And for everyone listening, I want to clarify that, that experience for me personally, it wasn't, well, as you guys heard from the story, I didn't handle it terribly well. But the good thing is that, as Brennan has mentioned, there's a different practice for everyone. Since then, I have attended many classes in normal temperature, normal humidity, and as as Brennan says, that there's really nothing better than in that moment, that feeling that you get from really tuning into what your body is speaking back to you.
Yeah, it's 100%
Yeah.
true.
So going forward, outside of the classes, or your teaching, what are some of the ways that people listening can incorporate yoga into other parts of their lifestyle, to where it's not where they just have to show up and they have that hour and that's where they can be attuned to their body? What are some other ways outside of the classroom that they can get that experience?
Yeah. So that's a great question, and that's one that I love talking about with my students because I'll always have a student here or there that can't make it to every class, but just wishes that they could incorporate some of the things, and that's why I always give them three little pieces of advice. And the first is do yoga poses when you feel like your body needs to. Now, we live in a very modern, rush society where we're sitting at a desk, whether you're in school, whether you're at work, you're sitting for a great deal of the day. And just doing one or two stretches for your hip flexors, like a lunge, doing something like that, or even like a back bend, like a heart opener, those are really good to get the blood flowing. If you're studying for 6-7 hours at a time, you just instead of taking your breaks on your phone and just scrolling mindlessly, if you take your 5 or 10 minute break from studying and you just stretch, you walk back and you sit down and you feel like rejuvenated. You truly feel like you just started studying almost. So that's the first thing that I always suggest is just do stretches when your body needs to, stretch when you need to take breaks from sitting down and stuff like that. The second piece of advice that I always give students is to always focus on your breath. We breathe in what would be considered to be a white bread sort of way, and I'll continue this analogy. White bread is bread. It's not really good for you. It's not bad for you, but it's not like good for you. And that's how we breathe normally throughout the day. We take short breaths. I mean, sure, I bet right now, anyone listening, and you, Michael, you're taking shallow breaths in your upper chest, in and out of your nose, not really focusing on it. And that's how our body, keeps us alive. It's these things that we don't have to think about, and everything like that. But if we could breathe in, let's say, a wheat bread sort of fashion. So wheat bread, it's bread still, yes, but it's also good for you. You have your fiber, you have your seeds or whatever else can be in the bread. That's a little bit more healthy for you. And does it take that much more effort to, eat wheat bread as opposed to white bread? I mean, maybe if you're a real big fan of Wonder Bread, sure, but I'm sure that switching to wheat bread isn't, that big of a deal for most people. And in the same way, if you catch yourself, breathing shallowly, to just start to focus on taking deep breaths in, I always suggest doing square breath, which is you take a 2 second inhale, you hold for 2 seconds, you exhale for 2 seconds, and then hold at the bottom of your breath for 2 seconds. And that's one square. And then you increase your square from 2 seconds to 3 seconds to 4 seconds. So then at the end, you're taking a nice deep 4 second inhale, you're holding it for four, exhaling for four, and holding for four. And that style of breath is super relaxing. It's what I personally do when I just need to give myself a break, whether it's I'm a little overwhelmed or I'm stressed. Square breathing always helps me no matter what. And that's the second piece of advice I always tell people. I tell everyone, You should always focus on your breathing, because breathing is important. We do it all the time, but we don't necessarily do breathing that is good for us. And then the third thing that I always tell people is be mindful of the thoughts that play into your head all the time. Now, this really can go into, like a life, go you kind of talk, but in reality, especially what I see in yoga classes is I see people who say, "Oh, I can't do that pose. I'm not strong enough." Or I'm, not flexible enough. And I always love to, at the end of that sentence, anytime I hear someone say something like that, I always interject at the end and I say, "Yet." I'm not strong enough yet. I'm not flexible enough yet.
Absolutely.
And it's that kind of mindset that I believe is really important to have in your day-to-day life. And that kind of theology, ideology bled into my day-to-day life during my teacher training. Because during my teacher training, I still personally can't do a handstand for longer than like 5 seconds. But you see all these Instagram yogis all the time doing fun things and handstand and stuff. So during my teacher training, I was like, "Oh no, I can't do that." And my yoga instructor said, "Oh no, you can't do that yet." And it was just that one word that stood out to me. So ever since then, anytime someone asks, how can I incorporate yoga into my day to day life, it's always add the "yet" at the end of your sentence, because if you do that, you're going to be pushing
Yeah.
yourself to a more positive outlook, and a more, let's say, solution oriented, not problem oriented mindset. If you're like, "Oh, I can't do this," that's just the problem. If you say, "I can't do that yet," then it guides you towards more of like, "Okay, what can I do to make myself better?"
Yet. I can't do that yet. I love that comment during my talk with Brendan. Hopefully, so far, you're enjoying our conversation on how to incorporate the concepts of yoga into your own life. I'm interrupting this episode real quick to remind you listeners that at GM Revolution, we believe every inspirational story deserves to be heard. So, if you're sitting there listening and thinking of someone that would be great to come on the podcast and share their story, please send us a message and we'd love to set up a conversation. In the meantime, don't forget to check out Brendan and other featured heroes on our website, gmrevolution.com. Alrighty, let's get back to the episode. It really, promotes action instead of more of the passive, just tossing the idea aside.
Yeah.
And what I'm hearing is, a lot of what you're saying, those 3 steps, whether it's taking breaths, learning how to breathe, taking breaks, learning how to breathe, and having that mind shift of introducing the word yet, all of those are super intentional. Especially, you take a break if you're studying or you're working and you've been sitting down a while. It's easy to take a break and just sit on your phone and scroll through Instagram or whatever it is. But, to take a break, do it intentionally. And I think that really promotes growth as opposed to just a break in time. You're still growing even though you're not focused on what you were.
Exactly. Exactly. That's a great way to think about it, because it's really important, especially in the academic standpoint, which is where I'm coming from since I'm still in school and I have been in school all my life essentially. You know, it's very important in that kind of standpoint, especially when it comes to, colleges, when it comes to high school, or excuse me, wherever you're really at, having intentional conversations with yourself, having intentional movements with yourself, just leading your life with intention. It's something that, it's a skill that will never go away, and it's an important skill to have. If you go through your mind, if you go through your life with your mind on autopilot, you're going to look back and be like, where did all the time go? But if you live your life with intention, and if you live your life not only through your thoughts but your breath and your movements with intention, you won't, look back and say, where did the time go? You'll look back and say, look at where all of the time went. Look at where I pushed myself. Look at where I went more, as opposed to where the time went. Isn't really on my mind. It's really, when I'm at my worst, if I got a bad grade, if, I'm feeling really stressed out or I'm really busy throughout a day. That's when you'll find me, taking aside the hour and a half that I want to, or even the hour, 45 minutes, whatever I can in my schedule to do yoga, to meditate, to sit down. And with all the time that I've been blessed with this pandemic, it's really been a great opportunity for me to realize that I needed to switch that, not from just a, only use it when you're down, to use it, whenever. So I think it's still active, but there's a great app called Headspace, which is very fun, interactive, mindfulness exercises, meditation. And I believe with the pandemic, they extended their free offer to as long as the pandemic's going. I'm not sure. You can't quote me on that. But Headspace is a great app that I use to meditate. I don't use it anymore because the yearly membership is, I think, like $80, and I just didn't want to do it because I felt that, the lessons they told me and taught me with the time that I did use it, I could, incorporate into my own meditations. But if you just really want something to keep you accountable, they have like a daily tracker for how many days in a row you meditate. They do, 10-minute meditation sessions, 30-minute, 2-minute. I mean, they literally have a 2-minute meditation session for when you're feeling overwhelmed, kind of deal.
Wow.
And the app's free. The subscription, I know, is quote unquote expensive. It's like I said, I think it's around $80 or $90 for a year. But I believe still right now all of it's free because of the pandemic. But like I said, in my day-to-day life,
Oh.
usually if I'm having a good day, you won't find me meditating or doing yoga, and that's something that I'm trying to change. But you'll mostly see me doing it, when I'm stressed out, because it's my quote unquote coping mechanism. It's the thing that I do all the time to give myself a break.
And, when you're, especially in those times when having a bad day or stressed out, that energy has to go somewhere. And if it's meditating or yoga or going on a run, that's a way to get that energy out. Or else, it's if you don't do those restorative practices, that energy will go elsewhere, and it'll start, creeping up elsewhere in your life, in your relationships, and how you treat people. So for me, the same exact thing. Whenever I'm down, having a rough day, my gut instinct is, okay, I have to go on a run. And just a half hour later, my mind is free, feeling better, looking at the situation differently. And it's the same for me with yoga. In my experiences, it's just a great way to start the day. Personally, I love to do it first thing in the morning when I wake up. It's a lot easier on the body as opposed to going on a
Yeah.
run first thing in the morning or going to the gym. It's just a great way to get your mind and body to start the day off on the right track.
Yeah, usually in the morning. So I know I said, like, my first point of, advice I can give to other people is incorporate it into your day-to-day life. Usually I don't even consider it my yoga practice, but every day when I wake up, I give myself my little stretches in the morning. I do a couple cat cows. If you don't know yoga, you can look up those poses. You're just in a tabletop position and you just drop your belly, stretch out your chest, squeeze your shoulder blades together. And then the reverse, cat pose, that was cow pose, but cat pose is then you engage your core, you round your back, flex your chest. And I just do that for 5 minutes. I do some twists, I warm up my spine, and I wouldn't even really consider it a yoga practice, but I mean it really is. I'm doing those yoga postures in a way with intention, with breath. um, but it truly is the best way to start your day. You are right.
Bring up that word intention again, because everything you do with yoga or those mental practices is for a reason. You know, going back to why you started because you wanted to become better at lacrosse. You wanted to become a better player. And now, as you see that throughout the rest of your life, you do yoga when you're stressed out because you want to feel better. It's it all
Yeah.
it's all purposed. There is an end goal, and it's great to have something you can turn to get you there.
Yeah, I 100% agree with you. It's something that's, really important. And like you were talking about with, if you're stressed, you go for a run. There is something to be said, and I'm sure science has or will prove this. I'm sure they have some point that physical fitness is just phenomenal for your mental being, and I mean besides for your physical being, but just to release. I'm sure the endorphins that are released when you exercise, when you just get the blood pumping and you do something intentionally, like I said, whether it's for you for running or for me yoga or even working out, it's something that is so good for you that people sometimes just miss throughout their day-to-day life. If they're stressed, they're like, oh, let me just kick back, watch TV, scroll through Instagram, let me just replace this I don't feel good with just something that's digital. And there like I said, there's something to be said about, intentionally changing that to something that's physical, to something that's you and not focused on other people.
And I think it's a huge trend of I was personally listening to a podcast a couple days ago of digital minimalism and the new book about that. But it's all about decluttering your digital space and tuning into the world around you and reconnecting with what it means to be a human. And I think yoga is a great way to introduce all that free time that you have once you declutter all of that time that you spend mindlessly searching and switch that to intentionally promoting growth somewhere in your life.
Yeah. And I am definitely not the perfect role model, because I've been using that weekly tracker for how much you're on your phone. I recently switched to get a new phone, and while my phone was out of service, I was using just like an iPod that was connected to Wi-Fi so that I can keep up with my friends and such. But in that week, it was I think 6 days. My current time that I was using my phone went from, I think my average now is like 5 hours a day, almost five and a half, maybe even 6 hours a day. And when I had that week where I just disconnected and I really wasn't using my phone, my quote unquote phone, until I needed it, when I was connected to Wi-Fi and I could talk to people or something like that, I think my weekly average dropped to, I think, around 2 hours a day, which is something
Yeah.
definitely to be said about how invasive a lot of things are in your life that you don't even realize. And me, as a not even a health expert, not even a health advisor, I'm someone who just enjoys yoga, enjoys teaching it, and I try to incorporate it into my day-to-day life. Even people, quote unquote, like me, where some people can see me as a resource for health and for fitness. I even get pulled into the non-digital minimalism, the I'm gonna just sit mindlessly through TikTok and just scroll on my phone for the next 30 minutes and just kill that time.
So a couple more questions here. We've
So
we've seen a huge trend, I think,
mhm.
lately with a younger generation taking up practices like yoga or tai chi. Why do you think that is, to where maybe our parents' generation or the generation before them, what is it about these restorative practices that are really gaining traction with that generation?
Um, I think that the question can be answered on two fronts. The first front definitely has to talk about the quality of life that we receive now, compared to possibly our parents or the generations before them. I think that our parents and the people in the generations before them had a lot of things on their mind. And granted, we have a lot of things on our mind as well. But I just don't think that the opportunity was there. I mean, yoga was brought over to America in the 1880s World Fair or something like that. And this was a practice that, in India was done. I mean, everyone was doing it. And it has taken essentially 200, 100 and 150 years, 1880, that'd be, yeah, 140 years for it to gain as much traction as it already has. So I think it's best answered as like it's a slow burner. It's something that people realize, people like catch in on it and they stay with it, and then they form their quote unquote tribe. They find their people to do yoga with, to do this with, and then they increase their tribe, their community. They reach out to other people who get invested. And I would be definitely, it definitely be along the lines of sacrilege to call it almost like a religion. But if you watch the way it forms, it's almost like people are starting to really take into this opportunity of taking stock into your physical well-being, your mental well-being, your spiritual well-being. And our new generation, seeing people do Tai Chi, people seeing people do Pilates and yoga and all of these things that are good for their health. Why they're coming up now? The other front could possibly be, more stock and physical appearance. I think that people now are starting to really appreciate what a fit body is and what a fit body looks like, and they want to orientate themselves with it, whether for good or for bad reasons. Because there can be something that can be said about, how pervasive this idea of a perfect image or a perfect body can be, and how dangerous those can be. But I think that the good side of it is people are taking stock in their well-being, and people are, focusing on seeing these practices that are good for not only your body but also for your mind. And like I said, the growth of yoga, the growth
Yeah.
of Tai Chi and Pilates and all these other practices can be described as a slow burner, where the people who are hooked on it are hooked on it. They're not leaving, and then they slowly bring people in. I mean, like I said, it's at a slow rate. I mean, like I said, 120 years ago, yoga was a thing that
Right.
wasn't talked about. But now, I mean, everyone and their mother's doing yoga.
I think it's super interesting that you you mentioned that first front, as you called it. It was difficult for them to get into yoga because they had something else on their mind, and times were harder. And that's clearly evident by the quality of life that we currently live in. Despite our own current problems, it is objectively much better than times, for example, with our grandparents growing up in post World War II. The country was just at a different
Yeah.
state, and more blue collar lives back then that clearly weren't interested in getting into yoga or another restorative practice. But at the same time, we talk about it's such a great way to relieve that stress or take some of that burden off. And so there's that kind of tension there between something that could really help someone going through a tough time with not having access or even the knowledge or understanding of what it would take to get there. And so I think a great thing that has happened in those 120 years is that the quality of life that a lot of us are privileged to have has allowed us to introduce those practices so that when times are tough, we can go we can go back and turn towards something productive, still in that growth mindset. And so for people listening that are currently going through really tough times, it's I think it's really important to note that, this is out there for you, that this might be the cure you're looking for or something that can just help you day to day. And it's not correct to think, oh, I don't have time for that.
I would 100% agree with you. It's something that, when I taught in St. Louis for the community classes that I taught through SLU, because I go to St. Louis University, uh, most of the people that take my classes, because the classes aren't just closed to SLU students, the classes are open to SLU faculty and to the St. Louis greater community who has, membership to our gym. And every single person who was not a student or faculty member from SLU, they're people who are objectively working their butts off. They're living very busy, very stressful lives. A lot of the people that I see who come into my classes are blue collar laborers who they need help with their back, and their doctor said, hey, do this, but then also start working on your physical fitness, start taking yoga classes and such. And I would go out and say that I think it's 100% of the students that weren't SLU students or faculty members, my yoga students. They were all adults who were, looking at, rough and, difficult and stressful times right now at their lives, and they're using that to, better themselves. And that's the best thing that I've seen lately. And that echoes what you were saying about, back in the day, people didn't think that they had this opportunity, or they didn't have the privilege or the means to access it. And now, you can find a yoga studio as common as you can find a Starbucks in most major cities, and that's great.
So I guess one final question to wrap this all up. You mentioned the convenience of yoga today. And how easy it is to find a studio near you. I want to know your thoughts on the convenience of the platform called YouTube. I know you've taught personally on Instagram Live, but do you think there is a difference in going to a studio to practice around people? Do you think you can get your fix in on your own yoga mat in your bedroom, tuning into a YouTube video? I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
It's a very different. It's a very interesting question to ask, and my answer is probably going to be a very different answer than a different instructor, and my answer may be very different to just anyone on the street. But in my experience, I'll say for me, there is nothing that can compare to an in studio class for reasons based on the instructor pushing you, the people pushing you around you. Not to say there's nothing that can replace it, but there's something special, in my opinion, about attending a class in person. For me as a yoga instructor, I don't personally like teaching classes online compared to in person. My favorite aspect about yoga is the community. And when I started teaching Instagram live classes, it was a shock for me about how different it was. I went from being able to interact and very very closely know all of my students' bodies, how they worked, what stretches were good for them, what stretches weren't. You know, I mean, I knew each of my students, peak pose that they wanted to get into. I knew some students wanted to perfect this posture or this posture. And when I taught online, I really just couldn't get that that connection with each of my students. So that's definitely something that I can say. However, as I've said, I think like many times, my favorite saying during this podcast is there's something to be said, but there is something to be said about yoga on YouTube. And there is something to be said about the online platforms, especially in this pandemic. I have been, plugging this person every single time someone asks me, but it's Yoga with Adrian. And I mean, if you just look up yoga on YouTube, I believe she's the top gal. And for a very good reason, for a very good reason. I mean, she teaches classes that you can find on YouTube that are an hour long, and then she has like 5 minute long classes. And if you don't have the time or the money to get into a studio, and we can have a conversation to unpack how terrible it is, how expensive yoga studios, the memberships are. And granted, there's not much you can really do about it because paying instructors, paying studio fees, the $120 that you see in membership a month for yoga studios is really as close to true as they're spending. Yoga studios aren't really making a ton of money off of memberships, but it is really sad that that's how much it costs to get a studio running, to get teachers paid, to get students in, because underprivileged groups really can't access the true I'll say joy, but it's also how amazing it is to take a class in person. And that's why a lot of studios, at least the ones that I've worked at, they've always done community classes where it's free or donation based. And they not usually, they always work towards good causes, at least the ones that I have worked with. And it's awesome to see the greater community of Chicago suburbs or the community of St. Louis come together to a class that's free or donation based, because it really helps fund the community. It really helps give people who don't have the access to a full-time membership or something like that the ability to take a class. But I do love the YouTube classes on with Yoga by Adrian, because in the pandemic, that's the closest that you're getting to a live in-person class, and they're great. And especially, like I said, for the time constraints, if you only have 5 minutes, you really can't take an hour out of your day to go to someone else's schedule yoga classes, because yoga classes don't schedule around your times, they schedule around their times. So if your
Right.
times don't work, yoga on YouTube is a great way to start practicing yoga. As I said, and I will say, you can't compare it to an in-person class, but it is phenomenal.
That's all I've got for you today. I think this was a great conversation. We touched on a lot of different parts about yoga and mindfulness, self-awareness. So thank you once again for taking your time to hop on this podcast and chat a little bit about what you're passionate about.
No, I really appreciate the opportunity. It's a great time, and like I said at the beginning, if you're thinking about it, If you're worried about it, take the plunge, take the dive, go take a yoga class, do it online, take some time out of your day, and hopefully it sticks.